Hello, everyone. Welcome to SOC 2 and IT audit automation for both CPAs and industry. This is being brought to you by ByteChek and also the MACPA. And I want to just take a minute to say thank you to the MACPA for giving ByteChek, myself, and AJ the opportunity to present here today. So let's talk about ourselves real quick. Today, we've got myself. I am the CFO and co-founder at ByteChek, and we've got AJ on, the CEO and co-founder at ByteChek as well. So really quick, I am a 20-year accounting and audit professional, CPA, financial audit and accounting for the first half of my career, IT audit and more SOC 2 in the second half of my career, also some other cybersecurity assessments, things of that nature. I've been heavily involved with the AICPA. I helped in the development of the SOC 2 guide, and really am passionate about making SOC 2 and these other types of assessments easier for the industry. Really excited to help out CPAs in general. AJ, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is AJ Yan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ByteCheck here with Jeff. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about a decade. The first half of my career spent in the U.S. Army as a signal officer, and then the latter half as a cybersecurity consultant, where I worked with startups to Fortune 500 companies with Jeff, and that's where we really realized there was a better way to do compliance assessments. So we're excited here to talk to you about what we're doing with ByteCheck and how does automation and SOC 2 fit together.
All right, so real quick on ByteChek, we'll go to the next slide and we'll talk about who is this new provider? Who is ByteChek? Well, we're a startup software company, and we've developed a product as well as services to help both business and industry and CPA firms get more efficient and accurate at SOC 2 and other cybersecurity reporting. And our goal is simple, really. We want to make the process of IT auditing easier and suck less. We know it because AJ and I lived this for over 10 years. There's in the traditional ways, it's manual requests, walkthroughs, sampling, gathering evidence. All that takes time and isn't exactly the most interesting aspect of helping your clients. Our solution is designed to automate and streamline these assessments so that you can get back to what your clients are looking for in a CPA, which is a trusted advisor who can help their business. So from our SOC 2 experience, we understand technical environments, we understand the outputs that need to be involved, and what makes up a quality SOC 2 report and what it has to achieve. Combining these factors, we made a platform that has a smooth integration with the tools that your clients are going to use, and understanding the story that the data needs to tell in order to provide a complete and quality report that can support your opinion in SOC 2. So the firm's going to gain efficiencies in testing, audit support documentation, and the development of the report itself, even the dreaded Section 3 system description, which we'll talk about a little later. And because AJ has an extensive security background and I've got a little bit of security myself, we've designed the platform so that you can help advise your clients on potential deficiencies in their security posture, which brings that technical expertise back to your CPA firm. So that's a little bit about ByteChek. Let's talk about today's agenda. Let's get to it. The agenda here, it's a quick slide, just information about SOC 2 to provide context is where we're going to start. Then I'm going to get into how SOC 2 was typically done in the past. After that, we're going to shift gears a bit. AJ is going to talk about what matters in a SOC 2 engagement, and then we're going to really dive into it then, showing you what future ready means for SOC 2. And that really is going to go around automation, how that comes into play, and how SOC 2 is going to be done better. So let's go. How did we get here? So we got here through, there was a progress. The first thing that happened was back in the day, there was SAS 70 or SAS 70. That a lot of people might be familiar with. Those were kind of like attestation reports at the beginning. In the early 2000s, SAS 70 was replaced by SSAE 16 as well as AT 101. SSAE 16 was where SOC 1 today used to lie. AT 101 was really the standard that drove SOC 2. So then in 2016, what happened was the AICPA clarified the attestation standards and everything became SSAE 18. So now SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC for cybersecurity. All these SOC reports fall under SSA 18. The section for SOC 2 in particular is ATC 205. There's also a common section, but the section that's really nails down into SOC 2 is 205. So just to give you a little bit of context, that's where it came from. So what is a SOC 2 report? SOC 2 report, as it says, it's a report on the controls relevant to a service organization, and then you have 5 categories: security, availability, confidentiality. Those are the most common, those 3. But you also have processing, integrity, and privacy. The cool thing about SOC 2 is that you don't have to do all 5 of these. You can do any combination of the 5, and you kind of determine those based on what commitments that the clients or service organizations make to their customers. So protection of data is something they commit to. Obviously, you're going to have security. If they're committing to 99.95% availability in a given month, you would want availability, etc. We're not going to get into too much more detail than that. Just wanted to explain what comprises of that SOC 2 report. So then let's talk now about each section of the report. Again, just to give you context so that we can talk later about the way things used to be and the way things are going. So section 1 is the independent auditor's report. Not much is going to change here. It's very similar to a lot of other attest opinions that you might have seen. It basically provides the reader some context as to what the auditor's responsibilities are, what management's responsibilities are, limitations, and then of course the opinion is in there as well. Section 2 is where we've got management's assertion. So section 2 is where management will state what this system is, and they're also going to state what the categories are in scope that we talked about in the previous slides. And then also they're going to state that the description is in accordance with the criteria laid out by the AICPA, which is called DC 200. And they're also going to state that the controls and the control environment is suitably designed to meet those categories that we talked about before. And then also, if it's a type 2 report, that they're operating effectively over a period of time. So those controls, that control environment has been operating effectively over a period of time. So that's kind of not going to change too much in the old way and new way. These are kind of almost canned language that comes from the AICPA. But then when we get into section 3 and 4 is where things get a little more interesting. So let's talk a little bit about section 3. So section 3 has got 9 criteria, DC 1 through DC 9, and you can see those on the left. It goes from the types of services. It's going to talk about the commitments that we mentioned before. So again, commitments around security, availability, things like that. The components of the system, that's what's in the middle column there. You got infrastructure, software, data, people, and procedures. Those are the components that the AICPA has laid out for description criteria. So you're going to talk about those in a system description. You're then going to talk about in DC4 any incidents that might have happened. This is a little more rare. I'm not going to get into too much detail on that today. And then DC5, that's a big one. That is the applicable criteria as well as the related controls. So that's where when you talk about these categories that are in scope, security, availability, confidentiality, et cetera, you're going to talk about what the criteria are for those categories, and then what are the controls that help meet those criteria. So think about it as you're describing the whole control environment here, and then you're going to identify those controls, which then we'll get into this in a little bit, but those controls get pulled into section 4 of the report. So section DC5 is a very important section. DC6, complementary user entity controls, that's going to be what the users of a service organization need to do. So for example, if they're responsible for making sure that someone who gets terminated gets their access removed, you would identify that there. DC7 is subservice organization controls. So a lot of applications that sit in the cloud, they'll sit on AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud Platform. Those are typical subservice organizations that we see. And what that means is that our service organization or our clients have to rely on AWS for the infrastructure and the physical security of that infrastructure. So that's where that comes into play. And then really quick, DC 8 and 9, these are just kind of really standard sections here, it's any criteria that are not applicable for whatever reason, you would identify why they're not applicable. And then if there were any changes during a type 2 period, what were they and what were the impacts? So some important considerations on the right is what's the purpose? Again, it's describing the scope of the system and the engagement. What's the boundaries? The user entity control is very important. Subservice organization controls are important. And then that control environment that we talked about, very, very important. I wanted to spend a lot of time on this slide because this is something that we feel that in the future can be made much easier. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So now section 4. Section 4 is where you have those controls that we identified in section 3, specifically, mostly around in DC5, you'll find them. That's where we're going to say, okay, here's the criteria that you have for, let's say, security. And then here's the controls that are in place at the service organization to meet those criteria. And then the next column will be, here's the auditor's testing of those controls. And then the fourth column will be the results of the control testing of those controls. So if there were any exceptions or deviations in testing, you would identify them there. So that's another area where specifically around controls, we're going to get into a lot more detail in a little bit on what happens in that part of the report. So on the next slide, we talk about why SOC 2. So what happened? What's driving these reports? Why is this becoming an extremely popular report these days, and only growing by the year? Customer demand being the biggest one. So due diligence that customers want to do on their vendors. They want to make sure that the environment is secure, that their data is going to be going through. They're basically also saying, you know, unless you have a SOC 2, we need to give you this questionnaire checklist, which talks about your logical access and change management and all that kind of stuff. Well, guess what? That gets covered in SOC 2. So that's why a lot of these entities will do it, because you can, and the proving of security, audit once, use many times, right? So instead of having to fill out 50 questionnaires that are asking the same questions about logical access, have it tested once in SOC 2 and provide that report out. So that's a big reason we see these reports happening. The other would be any kind of regulatory responsibilities. Perhaps there's a government oversight, they're going to need the report, things like that. It also demonstrates maturity. So showing that you have a secure environment will help you in your customers, like we were talking about before, or maybe to management, board of directors, things like that. And it, of course, enabling sales, it also falls into all these categories that we were talking about. The other nice thing about SOC 2 that's different from a lot of other frameworks is it's not a compliance framework. So when people say that they're SOC 2 compliant or they're SOC 2 certified, that's technically not accurate. It's really a reporting framework. It's an assertion, right? We talked about that in section 2 above. It's an assertion from management that then the auditor has an opinion on. Let's say management says, hey, we've got a system we feel is suitably designed and operating effectively to meet security commitments. The auditor performs their testing to see if that's true or not. What that does, though, is it allows for a little bit more flexibility in how you report that you meet criteria. So there's no prescribed set of controls that you have to meet in SOC 2. It's more of you just tell the story of how you're meeting the criteria that the AICPA has identified related to security. So if the AICPA says you need to have a risk management program in place, they don't tell you what controls are related to that. You identify your own and go from there. So on the next slide, we talk about report use. So the report use for SOC 2 is, number one, it's a restricted use report. You want to basically, it's a general, if you want to get technical, it is a general use report, but it's to the point where you should have an NDA in place with whoever's going to see it. And the reason for that is there's a lot of proprietary information in there, especially in that section 3 system description. You're going to be talking about these technical components of the system that you have, the controls you have in place. You want to make sure the people who are reading it are the people who should be reading it. So we talked about the purpose on the previous slide a lot, but then also another thing that you can do as a service organization is you can have that seal from the AICPA. Once you complete a SOC 2, you can apply for that. You can register to use the AICPA SOC logo, and you can use that on your website. So that's another reason that might help your sales. From a service organization's point of view, or your clients, if you're a CPA firm, why they would want it, they'd want to have that seal on their website. All right, So that's kind of an overall context around SOC 2. So now let's talk about what were the old ways of doing this. So 58% of organizations say compliance is a material barrier to enter new markets. And why is that a barrier? You can see there's 5 that we've identified and we've heard time and time again, AJ and I, over the time that we've been doing this. Engineers, developers, they're spending too much time dealing with this stuff. Assessments are taking too long. The on-site visits are too much with dealing with the auditors in-house. Subjective and manual testing, and then some automation tools that have been around for a little bit are causing even more confusion. These technologies have not really evolved that much over time. Auditors, they're still wasting startup founders' time. Fortune 100 companies are still overpaying Big Four consulting firms to bring in a team of unnecessary and non-technical auditors. And the worst part, the B2B companies on the other side of the table are required to produce an insane amount of evidence and in a manual fashion. And we're talking about printed documents here, screenshots, all that kind of stuff. Let me give you an example. Sometimes I think that's the best way to explain it. So one of the tests that we do in SOC 2 is under the CC 8.1 criteria, which is related to change management in the system. So think about how are changes made in a client system, what's the process around it, etc. The old method of testing that is that you'd be on site for the audit. You would then have to interview the developers on the change management process, get screenshots as they walk you through the process, make sure that they upload those screenshots because most likely they're controlling it. From there, after you've gotten your walkthrough documentation, you have to get a population of all the changes for the year, and you have to sample that population to test. Then you give that sample to the client. The client has to pull all the evidence for each sample, upload to a portal, or provide you however they used to provide. The auditor then has to review all of that evidence, documenting the results in a spreadsheet. And any exceptions, then you're going to have to inquire, follow up further. And the whole process, as you can tell, is very manual and it takes a while. So that's something that the way it used to be done. But let me give you another example. So another example is going to be in system descriptions. So again, this was section 3, like we talked about before. It's required for SOC 2 reports. And typically you saw those DC 1 through 9. That's a monster document. And it takes many hours on the client's part to have to figure out how to fill that out. They have to go to multiple sources like those developers and engineers, HR, to fill out the entire description of the system and its controls. The auditor then has to come along, and typically they're going to have to fix a lot of issues and a lot of areas in that description because there's initial client information that they provide, and the auditor has to get that in conformance with the DC 200 standards. It's not that often different than when a client tries to write their own financial footnotes. It's very manual, it's very back and forth, and another habitual violator of holding up and getting a SOC report done. So we founded ByteChek because we believe CPAs and service organizations can complete these SOC 2 examinations that are going to meet quality standards. They're efficient, they're adaptable, they're accurate, and they're focused on security and scalability using that automation. Technology has enabled us to move forward in so many different areas of our life. It's time we use technology to move forward in these SOC 2 examinations and other cybersecurity examinations too. Our experience in SOC 2 helped develop this platform. We built the processes and reports and everything with that expertise in mind. So we created this integrated and secure product that provides minimal disruption to the everyday operations of the client's business. So let's talk about here what matters in SOC 2. So in order to dive deeper for this automation and explain how the automation is making things easier, let's talk about what really matters here. Quality, efficiency, accuracy, security, adaptability, and scalability. Those are some of the biggest aspects that AJ and I identified in what matters when getting a SOC 2 report done. And we said, okay, with that in mind, how can we go a little bit deeper and figure out how we can make the process easier for both the client and the auditor to determine what can be done in a different way to automate things and make life easier for everybody. So I think it's time that I let the real tech expert get started here. And AJ, why don't you comment on each of these areas?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. From the SOC 2 expert to the tech expert. I hope I live up to the expert name here. So, let's start with quality. And every CPA or accountant or anybody that's been around SOC 2 listening to this webinar, you know that AI CPA standards require SOC 2 examinations to be conducted at the highest level of quality. This is why CPAs and CPA firms are the only ones that can issue SOC 2 reports. One thing that I've learned working with Jeff over the years are the ethical and quality standards that an accountant is bound by. That's not just words, those are what accountants live out and they operate with daily, which is why SOC 2 examinations are such valuable reports to outside parties. As Jeff was mentioning earlier about why individuals go under SOC 2, one of the reasons that you're able to build trust with SOC 2 is because everyone knows the quality and the standards that went behind the examination, what went back on the back end for CPA firms to actually issue these reports and be able to do these under the AI CPA standards. So quality is not negotiable in SOC 2s. While we believe, obviously, we're a software company, so we believe software is critical to ensuring high quality. We know that the quality demanded by the AI CPA and the industry as a whole, it's going to require a combination of humans and software to achieve that quality assurance. You have to combine some of that human element with the automation to make sure that it's doing things according to high standards, but also useful to the people on the other end that are using these tools. So when you're thinking about this and you're evaluating SOC 2 tools or you're thinking about automation in this industry, you should really look at the humans involved in building the solution. Do they have domain expertise? That's important, especially when it comes to the audit, cybersecurity, and accounting space. You should be working with individuals, accountants, cybersecurity professionals that know what they're doing, that know what SOC 2 means, that know what cybersecurity means to your organization. It's pretty common in this industry for really talented engineers, really smart folks that can develop products with the best of them. And some of the brightest folks I know are engineers or really smart marketers or really smart technologists to create products. That's usually the path. And Jeff and I obviously are a little bit different because our background is auditing. We're not the world's greatest engineers or the world's greatest marketers, but we are, we think we're the world's greatest accountants and auditors and technologists in the space. And the accounting and audit space isn't really an industry where software talent is more important than domain expertise. This is an industry where it's important that you know the ins and outs of the accounting and audit standards, that you know some of the landmines that are out there when you're going through the reporting process so that you can understand what to expect and be able to make sure your report is reflecting that expertise. The team behind the software matters from a quality perspective. And this is really why we founded ByteCheck. We saw a gap in the marketplace. Looking at all the tools out there that help with SOC 2 automation, there wasn't a tool built by individuals like Jeff, who have been in accounting for over 20 years, who helped author the SOC 2 guide and has been an advocate for high quality SOC 2 reports for years, or someone like myself who sat in those rooms and performed those audits for years after years and helped organizations establish cloud security or secure cloud workloads and worked with startups and Fortune 500s on trying to solve some of their biggest SOC 2 challenges. One example of how automation and quality go hand in hand in this combination of humans plus software is the system description that Jeff mentioned earlier. So as Jeff was talking about, there's all of these different components of the system description, right? You have all of these things identified in DC9, particularly looking at DC3, we see infrastructure, we see software, we see data, we see people. In DC5, we're thinking about all of these different control activities. The beauty of automation is that it allows you to take information that's already present and use it and apply that to your different practices, procedures, and ultimately to your report. So one of the things that we've been able to do with the system description is take Jeff's experience, take his knowledge around SOC 2. And funny story, When Jeff and I used to work together in a previous firm, Jeff was the final quality assurance check on most system descriptions that we issued. That was a firm that, we conducted well over 300 SOC examinations a year. So you think about how many system descriptions poor Jeff has had to read over the years. That's a lot of system descriptions he's looked at, along with his experience writing the SOC 2 guide. He understands what goes into this report. He understands what DC 200 from the AICPA wants to see in each of these sections. So we took that experience. We took my experience of being in those rooms, helping organizations get through this dreaded system description, and built an automated solution for creating the system description. But it's not just to create it, it's to make sure that it's accurate and meets AICPA standards. And the reason we did this is because we understand auditing. We understand that the system description is really important. It's time consuming in a traditional manner for both the auditor and the client. Oftentimes, clients don't understand the input, and auditors don't really have the bandwidth to teach their clients what right looks like, which generally results in a bunch of back and forth emails, document exchanges, and then ultimately the auditor ends up writing section 3 for the service organization just to get through the assessment. You get to the end and you end up just taking it over, even though this is a document that the service organization should own, maintain, and keep up to date throughout their review period. So one of the things that we did is, our platform eliminates a lot of that back and forth. We built an intuitive system description generator, which includes step-by-step instructions from Jeff, AICPA standard references, and ultimately result in a downloadable Word document that clients can provide to their auditors. And your auditors will know that this system description was created with our experience in mind. And this is where domain expertise and seeing the interwoven nature of the humans and the software and how that helps achieve quality assurance, which is so important in SOC 2 examinations. Another thing that we talked about that Jeff mentioned that matters in a SOC 2 is efficiency. And oftentimes I think when people hear automation, especially, in the tech industry, we start to think that it's going to take away jobs or eliminate positions. But we think the opposite here at ByteChek. We think of automation as a way to empower people to do what they were hired to do. I don't think anyone that was hired into a position, especially not accountants, for how smart accountants are and the rigors with which you had to go through to achieve your CPA. I don't think, you were hired to do repetitive tasks. You were hired to critically think. You were hired to innovate. You were hired to be a trusted advisor to your clients. And that's what automation allows you to do. It allows those team members not to spend time reviewing manual evidence, reviewing information from the cloud providers and the testing environment, and maybe looking at technical information that they don't quite understand. I remember my experience as an auditor. One of the things that you go through is every client environment is different. Somebody might be using AWS, somebody might be using Azure, and then the next week you're working with a client that's using Google Cloud Platform. And what that adds is a layer of complexity, because you as the auditor or the accountant there performing the assessment, you have to learn these technologies. You have to learn them at an intimate level for every single client so that you can provide a good service, so that you can be that trusted advisor that's providing recommendations and teaching clients how to better improve their environments. So it's really difficult to do that, be efficient, and be a trusted advisor. I remember spending a ridiculous amount of time trying to learn the technologies my clients were using, when I should have been spending that time being able just to talk to them, have a conversation, to understand some of the challenges they're facing to implement these things. Because it's all information that's public and is easy to collect, we've taken that information that normally would take a staff accountant or an auditor a bunch of time to go through this technical testing, and now you can do it directly in a platform. And our platform comes with automated recommendations. So instead of you having to search on the internet how to better enable data encryption on AWS, we provide that directly to the clients in the platform, which allows you to go back to being that trusted advisor. No one was hired, especially not accountants, to complete routine manual tasks. And I think automation eliminates those tasks and allows your staff to be more productive and have a higher quality of life. We know how it gets in Q4 for auditing and accounting, especially, or on the accounting side. I'm sure Q1 is the example of Q4 for cybersecurity, when you're going through and performing these back-to-back engagements, a bunch of tight deadlines. That's tough for staff, but automation helps to improve their quality of life, where they're not spending hours on repetitive manual tasks. But we wanted to focus on automation, not just for the service organization, but for the service organization and the auditor. That's why, on the first slide, Jeff mentioned this is a better way of doing cybersecurity assessments for both the client and the auditor, for business and industry and for accountants. The marketplace right now is littered with tools that help the service org, and you see it in their marketing material, faster SOC 2 examinations, complete your SOC 2 in 3 weeks. You can do this in X amount of time. And that focuses on the service org. Service orgs are signing up for these tools and they think by using the tool, it's going to speed up the auditor side, but the tools were not built with the auditor in mind. So now auditors are left to reduce their fees, but for these customers that are using these tools, while still having to perform the same, if not more, work for the assessment in some cases. So instead of being able to go into a platform, perform your testing, or your clients being able to generate their system description in an automated fashion, the auditors are still doing a lot of manual work, still pulling evidence outside of these automation tools into another tool, which is not right for the auditors. Automation should be effective for both the auditor and client. And this goes back to quality and domain expertise. We built our platform to focus on both sides. ByteCheck sits in the middle to help facilitate an efficient audit for both the auditor and the client, which is really what this should be about in the accounting and audit space, is really what the software solution should be, is to automate the entire process, not just one side of it. And when auditors and accountants, when you start to use automation, you're allowed to focus on being that trusted advisor. You spend less time on testing and review. You're not just pushing through an audit. Your Q4 becomes a lot more manageable because your team isn't overloaded with these manual repetitive testing tasks or manual repetitive requests to clients about what information they need to provide or the recommendations to fix those things. You're now able to have that staff provide valuable time and advice to your clients, to your clients that help grow that relationship. The biggest part about what we do is relationship based and building trust. And the way that you do that is showing that you're knowledgeable at certain topics and not being bogged down by manual repetitive tasks. So, automation, it helps with efficiency, but we built our platform not just to be efficient for one side, but for both the client and the auditor. And now we're focused on accuracy. My experience being an auditor, especially in the cybersecurity space and working on SOC 2 over the years, is that accuracy is really hard. Auditing is hard. Performing these assessments is not easy. And it takes, like I mentioned before, a level of depth of understanding the tools, the technologies an organization is using, how those are all weaving together across the environment. And it's subjective at times. We would go during assessments, people would always say, oh, you're a technical auditor, which I really hated that term because I feel like since we're doing technical audits, everybody should be technical, right? I don't know what the alternative is, but it's true. Not every single auditor is going to be a cloud expert, and they don't need to be. Not every single auditor is going to know how to code. Not every single auditor is going to understand how to automate security, and that's not needed. Auditors don't need to be, or accountants don't need to be experts on technology. They should understand the basics of it, but they don't need to be experts. And while that's true, what that results in is subjective human testing. You may get a version of myself who's an AWS expert and understands how the AWS services fit into a SOC 2 examination. But what if you get somebody that's not? What if you get somebody that's never worked in the cloud and you're a cloud environment and they're your auditor? And that's where some of the inaccuracies come in auditing, something as simple as requesting evidence for your security groups. On AWS, most auditors, and I did it at first before I learned about this, would ask for screenshots of security groups. And security groups are just virtual firewalls in the cloud to help protect your resources from outside threats. The problem with asking for security groups is that it's not showing the full picture. A screenshot will only show resources or security groups in one region, and most organizations are hosted in multiple regions in the cloud. So there could potentially be a whole segment of that system that we talked about in the system description, a whole segment of that system that's not being evaluated during the assessment, which obviously is not great. So the fact of automation and being into the SOC 2 it eliminates that subjective human testing. It allows the technology to go out and get accurate information in real time. And it also allows the accountants and the auditors not to be required to dive deep into being a cloud expert, not to be aware of every single new cloud change, because you should be focused on being that trusted advisor from an audit and accounting perspective. But again, going back to the domain expertise, automated testing is only as good as the humans who oversee it. And one of the things that we wanted to do in our platform is provide clients with insight into how auditors are going to test particular controls. So as soon as they connect their environments, they are able to see, using what we call the ByteCheck engine, exactly how their controls stack up against audit and AICPA standards. What this means is that Jeff and I took our years of experience, our understanding of what goes into sampling, and we built an engine that performs statistical analysis to help test controls based off of sampling requirements and testing over a large population. And that's where the power of the humans who oversee the technology comes into play. You can look across the industry, you can look at other tools. There's no other tool that's taking in this information and performing audit and AICPA standards. And that's my opinion. There might be another tool out there, who knows? But I think ByteCheck's the only one doing it right from that perspective, and being able to really take individuals who've performed the testing, who have done sample testing, who helped author the guide that gives us the roadmap to how to do this. We built our engine so that our clients now can take advantage of that expertise in their environment. And the auditors from the CPA side, your clients can get a readiness assessment that actually shows them what's going on before you even step in. Being more efficient. Again, you're able to talk to them about more things other than the testing and the recommendations. So it's important to make sure when you're looking at automation tools out there in the marketplace, what are the humans behind the technology that's performing the testing? And I'm a strong believer that it's hard and near impossible to achieve technically accurate testing in the SOC 2 without automation. Going back to that security group example, if you don't understand how that works, or the difference between a global and a regional service in AWS, it's very likely that you're going to miss some resources. Or if you don't understand which reports to use, or where information lives in AWS, or what are the type of things that you should evaluate in GitHub or Jira and these other environments, there's going to be gaps. There's going to be issues there that you don't want to put yourself in a bad situation where you're not giving technically accurate advice and your opinion's not based on technically accurate advice. And that's another reason why we focused on automation, because we want the opinion in the report to reflect a technically accurate testing environment. Accuracy is so important in these assessments. Going back to the quality aspect, you really cannot have high quality if the report's inaccurate. And a term we use a lot in SOC 2 is completeness and accuracy. How do you perform completeness and accuracy? How do you make sure that the inputs are accurate for your testing or for that population? And that's where technology becomes really powerful, because technology is consistent, right? Software is consistent. When it does it right one time, it's going to continually do it right. Software doesn't have a bad day. They're not going to wake up on the wrong side of the bed. So that accuracy begins to be embedded in the technology, and you're not relying on humans who we all, sometimes wake up on the wrong side of the bed, or sometimes we just don't know something. And it's hard for us to perform that technically accurate engagement. So automation helps there. And we think with the automation, you have to make sure that it's accurate, that it's pulling in information, and that it's being done according to the standards that you care about. Moving on to security. Apologies there, I had to drink some water. This is something that I am extremely passionate about. Jeff is extremely passionate about, and really one of the drivers behind starting ByteCheck. The whole point of undergoing a SOC 2 examination is to prove security and establish trust with external parties. That's what your service organization. I'll give you a kind of a scenario here. You're a service organization, you're sitting there, you're a small startup maybe, and your software is taking off. You're beginning to get customers left and right. And now you have your big Fortune 5 customer knocking on the door, ready to do business with you. And they say, all right, we're ready to sign on the bottom line. This is going to be a huge contract, change the trajectory of your company. but first I need to see your SOC 2. I need to make sure that you're secure. And that's the whole point. The whole point is that someone needs you to prove security so that they can establish trust, whether that someone is a customer, a vendor, a partner, some regulatory body. You're proving security. And I think, and Jeff thinks as well, SOC 2 can be in the industry the premier security report, the premier cybersecurity assessment for many reasons. One of them being that it's governed by AICPA standards. So the reliability of this report is higher than the traditional assessment because of the people that have to issue them, the CPAs that have to issue them. And we think, that SOC 2s should be way more than a check the box exercise. This should be something that not just proves security externally, but also results in better security for the service organization. You come out of these reports with a better way to prove security. And here's a scenario that illustrates the importance of this point and also illustrates the issue right now in the marketplace. Most, you're a service organization, you're sitting there, you go through your SOC 2 examination, and let's say you overpaid and it cost you $50,000 for the SOC 2 Type 2. You're hosted on AWS, you wanted to take advantage of the cloud provider that most companies are hosted on nowadays. And you're a sophisticated SOC 2 person, you've been in the industry for a while, and you go through your report, your auditors come through, they do their assessment, they ultimately issue you the report, and you realize, and you pick up your report, and you see that there's no control around S3 buckets. S3 buckets, simple storage service is what it stands for, are just object storage, an object storage service in the cloud. It's where you can upload PDFs, videos, documents, et cetera. And it's usually the way that most organizations move into the cloud. They start with storage. They move their documents in there. If you ever uploaded a document to a web application, chances are it was hosted on Amazon and you uploaded that to an S3 bucket. And if you search out there, common cloud security breaches, the thing that will continually pop up, I encourage you to do, search common cloud security breaches. The thing that you'll see repeated are S3 bucket breaches. And what happens are organizations leave these buckets that store sensitive data public. They leave them open for anyone to access and read and write over that information. And it's a common breach. It's something that many organizations out there have been affected by this and had to pay a lot of money. But if you pick up a SOC 2, you're a sophisticated reader and you don't see an S3 bucket control, you have to start asking yourself, what was the point? What was the point of going through paying $50,000, spending 3 months maybe with assessors to get a report, go through all of that, that doesn't even address the most common breach in your environment? And that's why we are focusing on security. That's why we're focusing on good and relevant security. It's relevant security to your environment. It's a no-brainer to us and honestly table stakes to evaluate S3 buckets in a SOC 2 examination. When you talk about CC 6.1 and CC 6.6, where you're thinking about logical access security, preventing outside threats from getting into your environment, we think that you should have an S3 bucket control to address that criteria because it's such a common breach. And that's where, we want people to get organizations and auditors to obtain security value out of these reports, not just get a check the box, not just get through the audit, but actually address things that matter to you and your environment. And that's what we're doing here at ByteCheck. We focus on good security. If you're hosted on the cloud, we are going to focus on cloud security basics that we know will cause issues. Our platform may help you address some security weaknesses that were not evaluated in prior SOC 2 examinations. And as you're going through those, we're not just going to point out issues. You're going to get actual actionable recommendations, guides on how you can automate these things. For example, I have published and produced videos on how to automate multi-factor authentication on the cloud, how to eliminate that S3 bucket breach and how to automate that as well. And you can do it all without being a developer and without writing a line of code. So we believe SOC 2 and security go hand in hand. And it should matter. When you're evaluating where you're going to do your SOC 2 or when you're evaluating what tools to use, you should be asking questions about how is this going to help me use security as a competitive advantage? What controls am I going to have in my report that are going to highlight the things that I'm doing to go above and beyond the normal security things? And the reason why our organizations that work with ByteCheck get to do this is because they get to take our cloud expertise. They get to, and you as the auditor, you as the CPA firm get to take our cloud expertise and pass it on to your customers, because the software is evaluating these cloud security basics and it's providing those actionable recommendations. Security is so important. This is where you can become that trusted advisor. This is where you can really add value to your customers. And then at the end of the day, the client has a report that not only is going to check that box to prove security, but it's going to be used as a competitive advantage. You can start to talk about things that you're doing at a higher level than your competitors or other folks in the industry. Moving on to adaptability, we all know that are familiar with SOC 2. It's not a one size fits all. It was designed to be flexible, adaptable, and really specific to the service organization. The automation tools that support SOC 2 examination should reflect this flexibility. There's not a set of controls that you can use in every SOC 2 examination. Some controls require manual testing, others require a mix of automation and the human element. And automation really should be focused on that. And that's where the human element, the domain expertise comes in, is because you should be able to, from the audit perspective as the auditor and the service organization, control how the examination is conducted. If you don't, on the ByteChek platform, we understand, we made sure that every control that's being evaluated, you as the service organization decides how it's being tested. If you want to integrate with the tools that we integrate with, fine. If you want to upload manual evidence, also okay. As the auditor, if you want more information beyond what the integrations have shown you, you can ask for additional information and do that directly in the platform. So again, being able to use SOC 2 in the way that it was intended, but use software to do that. Our team and our platform's unrelenting focus on security, that allows organizations to add additional controls, to customize their report a little bit, to highlight those above and beyond security requirements they've implemented as a result of using the ByteChek platform. So, we make sure that you can change as the auditor, as a service organization, the tools that are integrated, your control wording, the inputs to the information security policy, the auditor testing status, all of it. Just like a SOC 2, our platform is customizable and flexible, which is what these tools should reflect. Automation doesn't work if it's not relevant to the actual activity that you're doing. And that's why it's important about the team behind ByteChek, which I keep going back to, because you'll see these things and these pillars that we're talking about that matter in SOC 2, it all comes back to what you know about this entire industry, what you know about the audit and the accounting space. And then lastly, Jeff and I over time have worked with a lot of startups, and we've helped some of the biggest companies now, when they were startups, grow their security programs from the infancy stage all the way up to these robust and effective security programs. And that experience taught us that, these successful companies, the ones that become really successful from a business and a security standpoint, they focused on scaling their security program just as much as they focused on scaling their revenue, their team, and their product. So we focused on scaling security too here at ByteChek. Our platform makes sure that organizations are thinking about security from the beginning and implementing practices that are actually going to assist organizations with growing over time. And that's why our product, it always focused on testing scalable security. One of the examples, going back to Jeff's change management example on the platform, is we assess branch protections. And I'll briefly explain this. We won't go super technical, but a common version control tool is GitHub. It's where you can manage your code development, you can manage approvals, peer reviews, testing, all that good stuff that matters to address CC 8.1. And the way that ByteChek tests this is we don't go out and test each individual change. We know development can get hard, features have to go out on a Friday night, bugs happen. So sometimes processes are skipped, and we often see exceptions in the change management space. So we go out and test to make sure that you've configured GitHub at its core, at its foundation. Do you require testing every single time? Do you require reviews every single time? Do you require approvals every single time? And we test the configurations. Again, building scalable security. If you set that up at the branch protection level from the beginning, when you have 3 developers, every change will go and follow those rules according to your information security policy. When you have 100 developers, it still will be implemented. And that's what the whole shifting security left or DevSecOps happens that you've heard about probably in the industry, where you're trying to make security more of a repeated function instead of a one-on-one function or one-time thing. And that's what ByteChek focuses on with our platform and the way that we test. Another thing that happens with growth is, your customers are going to begin to demand additional compliance assessments. They're going to demand you go beyond SOC 2. You're going to be asked about CMMC, ISO, maybe HIPAA, high trust, et cetera. And your platform and automation should grow with you, and keep this in mind. We're pre-built with mapping to these multiple frameworks. We're constantly leveraging our years of audit experience to improve the product and help address additional frameworks. And that allows you to grow with the platform, or the platform to grow with you. And as you go into these other frameworks, you don't need to hire a team to come in and map controls. You don't need to, as the auditor, become an expert on PCI or ISO or HIPAA or high trust. You can leverage our platform to see where does the SOC 2 controls map over to these other controls, and how far is the organization from addressing those. And that helps inform decisions, help inform security growth plans. Also, as the auditor, it helps you say, hey, client, hey, service organization, you're really close to HIPAA, or you're really close to CMMC. You should explore that, and allows you as the organization to kind of land and expand that account and grow that account into other frameworks as they grow. So just to talk a little bit deeper about ByteChek and how we do this, how do we focus on all of those elements that I just spoke about? This is where we get into the platform. What does the platform really do? So we built our platform with startups and small businesses in mind, knowing that these organizations probably won't have a staff, or maybe don't even have a full cybersecurity team. So they need to start at their information security policy. Your controls are derived from that policy. That's where the foundation of the security environment starts. And that's the first thing an organization does on the platform. They use our intuitive information security policy generator to identify when they're performing controls. That ultimately takes those inputs. If they say they do quarterly vulnerability scans, those inputs are reflected in the platform on how we test those controls and how those controls are actually evaluated, going back to what a control is actually supposed to be based off of your information security policy and your commitments and your system requirements. The next thing that happens in the platform is they go from the information security policy to the full suite of integrations. And that's where we get into this automation of evidence collection. That's where we go and connect directly to AWS or directly to GitHub or Jira or whatever other tools are out there where this evidence lives. And these integrations, we built them with the direct personas in mind that we deal with in this space. People, not every compliance manager, not every auditor is a technical expert. So our integrations are easy to use. They're intuitive. They come with screenshots and examples. We made it super easy to integrate, where you can get set up on the platform in less than an hour. And once you're set up, you have automated and actionable recommendations, things that you can go out and fix immediately with step-by-step instructions on how to do it. And that's where the platform is really powerful for the service auditor. As you're going through and you're thinking about your readiness assessments, how can you speed up the ability to provide that trusted advisor guidance to your client, while also being able to still serve the many clients that you may have? So this platform takes the hard part of the readiness out of your methodology by providing those recommendations immediately, and the recommendations are actionable. So the service org can plug in less than an hour and immediately have a roadmap on what they need to fix and how to get there. A few other things that we've built into the platform. We know that there's a lot of communication in audit. So you have a real-time chat functionality between the auditor and the service org, where you can chat directly on a control to identify, what's expected and what's not expected. We also have automation of employee onboarding. Jeff and I have found in our past that most exceptions or deviations are derived from the employee onboarding process, security awareness training, employee information security policy acknowledgements, background checks, all of the things that you probably had to do when you started at an organization. We made sure that our platform allows your employees to complete those tasks on the ByteChek platform. So no more having to go track down HR, bother them and ask them about these onboarding procedures. The compliance manager can manage that directly in the ByteChek platform and know where there's weaknesses, know where there's gaps in this process to make sure that their employee onboarding process remains compliant throughout their review period. We briefly touched on the system description automation earlier. We're really excited about that, really excited about providing a way for service organizations to complete a high quality, high standard system description, and also the service auditors to receive that high quality system description and spend less time reviewing and updating that for their service organization. Another thing that we're really excited about are automated audit procedures. Every single auditor understands that there's additional procedures that go into these assessments. We built this to show our expertise, but also to help CPA firms complete procedures that are accurate according to this automation. So all of those work paper files, all of those documents that you have to complete to prove to a peer reviewer or to just make sure that your firm is doing things according to your quality standards, we're building the automated audit procedures directly into the platform so that you can perform those checks right there. And if you don't want to perform them, just like everything else in the ByteChek platform, fully customizable. You have the choice and the ability to either use our automation or do it in your traditional way. But we wanted to empower CPA firms to complete their audit 100% in the platform and do as much of this in an automated fashion so that you can get back to that trusted advisor role. So, we're really excited about what we're building here, really excited about how this is going to impact the profession and really how it's going to take SOC 2 and continue to elevate it as that premier report in the security industry.
What really makes ByteCheck different from some of the other tools that CPA firms might have heard about that are out there when it comes to automation and GRC and SOC 2?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of tools out there. There's definitely a marketplace filled with these tools that are trying to help this process. And the biggest differentiator, or there's two really that I like to point out. One, from the beginning and throughout this presentation, you've heard us talk about ByteCheck being for the client and for the auditor. You're going to be hard pressed to find another tool out there that's communicating that we're trying to make the auditor's life easier as well. Most tools out there are focused on the service organization, but we don't feel like you can make a SOC 2 examination easier or better by only focusing on the service organization. You have to think about the auditor as well. And then the second thing, it's as a startup, as a smaller organization, aside from the product, aside from the idea, aside from the market, the most important thing that you can bet on when you're working with a startup, when you're working with a company that's small, is the team. Is who is the team behind it? Who are the people that are actually driving the development? Who are the people that are driving the business model and that are making decisions? And if you look at our team, if you look at who we are and what we've done, there's not really a better group here that you have to do this, to solve this problem. You think about Jeff's accounting experience. You think about what he's done in this industry, from working directly with the AICPA, helping to author the SOC 2 guide, to sitting on different committees, board of directors at the Maryland Association of CPAs in the past. All of the different things that he's done to continue to give back to the accounting space while maintaining a high standard of SOC 2. That experience, combined with what I've been able to do from the cloud perspective, my military background, that regimented, disciplined, very process-oriented mindset, you see it throughout our documentation. You see it throughout in our platform. You see the combination of cloud security expertise, information security expertise, accounting and audit expertise coming together to build a tool that is really going to help revolutionize this space, really help elevate SOC 2 even higher, and elevate CPA firms, I think. That's where the difference comes into the play. As a small company, it's really about us. And I think, I'm obviously biased, but I think our team is the best that's out there. I think we're the right ones to fix this, and that's what makes us different.
I think I'll agree with that.
Yep. This has been a ton of fun. Again, thank you, MACPA, for providing the opportunity, for giving us a chance to speak directly to the people we think are going to benefit directly from our tool. And we really thank everybody that's stuck around and listened. We're obviously excited about what we're building, what this means for the accounting profession. We're technology innovators with an anticipatory mindset, which is why we partnered with the MICPA as a preferred provider. We wanted to be an integral part of making MACPA members and the firms here future ready. So we enjoy talking with other innovators in the accounting space. Connect with us on LinkedIn. We're pretty active there. Reach out in a message or a comment to just chat about accounting, cybersecurity. If you like golf, we like golf as well. Or to find out how ByteChek and your organization can work together to make IT audits suck less. So thank you. Visit us at www.bytecheck.com, and I hope you all have a great holiday season.
Thanks a lot. See ya.